Lieutenant Todd Royce with the Utah Highway Patrol, Public Information Officer. Thank you so much for being part of Three Questions.
Thanks for having me, Bob. I appreciate it.
In recent months, we have seen just incredible bravery on the part of UHP troopers who have literally stopped high-speed chases by turning into oncoming suspect vehicles. Now, training for that kind of a maneuver technically is one thing, but how do you train a trooper to have the nerves of steel that it takes to carry out that kind of a maneuver?
Well, that's a great question, because a lot of the troopers out there, they get some great training. Our training staff is top-notch. But a lot of them know the consequences to maybe somebody going the wrong way on the roadway. And they've got an innate desire to get that stopped and to stop that. So one part of it is training. The other part of it is just guts and sheer desire to fix the problem.
Can you train for that? Can you train someone to have those kinds of nerves of steel?
I don't think so. I think it's a lot like a good hunting dog. You know, you've got to have it there, and then you can work with that. So when we hire troopers and when we look for troopers, we're looking for that innate desire to serve, and then build on that.
When the weather gets bad, every time a UHP trooper steps out of their vehicle, they're putting their lives at risk. We have seen troopers get hit, multiple troopers get hit over this past winter, and some of them very dramatically. Is there a way to rethink the way you respond to those weather-related traffic accidents in such a way that does not put the trooper at quite so much risk?
So what we try to do, things have changed a lot since even I hired on 23 years ago. The way we do things, the way we switched from a driver's side approach to a passenger side approach to get them away from traffic. But that's the million-dollar question. The worst thing for us is to have a trooper go home hurt or not go home at all. That's the colonel's worst fear. That's everybody's worst fear. So if somebody's got a solution to that, we'd sure love to hear it. And until then, we're going to train, we're going to practice, we're going to try to use best practices to try to keep our troopers safe and to keep the public safe.
Every year it seems like Utah drivers have to relearn driving in the snow again, and it takes about a week for that to happen. Is there a way to reduce that time and to shorten that curve so that people are more used to driving in tough conditions than it seems like it takes them to get used to every year?
I think it has to do with experience and education. I think, you know, when I come on TV and I talk about the weather, I feel like a broken record. When you call me up and say, hey, can I do a story about the weather? And sometimes I feel like just take a clip from last year, because it's going to be the same. But our hopes is that people will just look and anticipate the problems. And we can't say it enough. Just anticipate those problems. And if we could back time up sometimes and do a better job at getting that information out to people, we'd love to do that. But it seems like a broken record sometimes, and sometimes I feel like a broken record. But it's the same thing, and it's drivers, and it's their abilities, and it's their thought process into doing the right thing and doing it at the right time.
And slowing down too.
Correct, and that's the biggest one, is just make sure to reduce the speed. It buys you time, buys you distance, it buys you control on your vehicle. It's all physics.
Have you ever had any close calls on the road?
I have. In fact, I actually had to jump over the wall down in Utah County once, and I never told my wife about it until later on. I was with my sergeant, and my old sergeant, he's retired now, and we were at a dinner, and he goes on to tell a story because he was there. And my wife looked over at me and she says, you never told me that story before. And I said, yeah, sometimes it's better that way. So yeah, I had to jump over the wall, and a lady came into the median at highway speeds, and I could literally feel her car go past the back of my leg as I was going over the wall, and it was one of those adrenaline rushes where you just get a headache afterwards because it was so strong, and it scared me.
How do troopers' families deal with the idea that every time they walk out the door, their life is at risk from moment to moment? Any time during that shift, your life could end. How do your families deal with that?
That's kind of an emotional question for me, Bob, because they are the unsung heroes out there. Is my wife and my children, because they have to deal with that. I asked my wife once. I said, "How does that play into your life? How do you sleep at night, working graveyards and stuff?" She says, "I just have to kind of push it out of my mind." And after 23 years of doing this job and going out and working hard and being in those situations, she needs a medal. I mean, she's a rock star. And all of the spouses to all of these police officers out there, they need more than the officers need, because it's taxing on families.
UHP troopers run the gamut when it comes to carrying out duties by the side of the freeway. Everything from delivering babies to responding to horrific fatal crashes. How do you deal with the trauma that is just part of your job?
So a good base, I mean, my kids get sick of me hugging them when I come home, just because you just have to have a good foundation. And there's times when we have to go do fatal notifications, where we have to go up to a door, knock on a door. You feel like the Grim Reaper sometimes, because you know something that the people behind the door don't know. And that's the hardest part of our job, bar none, is to go up there and let people know, because it becomes personal. That's when it becomes personal. And you walk in and you see the picture of the family on the wall, and that's when it starts to become personal and becomes emotional. I've seen law enforcement officers break down and literally start to sob, which is good. That's what we want to see. We want to see the emotions. But that's where good family support, because we're people. Law enforcement are people. Sometimes the general public loses that thought, but we're husbands, we're wives, we're spouses, we're brothers, we're sisters. We're just people down under and inside. My department gives us a lot of help. We have a psychologist on retainer, and we look at that, and we look at the psychological health of our officers, because it's very important. You can become jaded as a law enforcement officer. You can become shut off. We as supervisors, we look for that, and hopefully we can give those troopers the help that they need to overcome that.
Sometimes it's difficult for law enforcement officers and troopers to really open up when this kind of thing is starting to weigh on them. What are some of the tools that you can give those officers who are a little more reserved and don't want to share quite so much, to be able to deal with the trauma and the stress that just comes with the job?
So some of the things that we do, and we do it unknowingly. A lot of times people will see law enforcement sitting down for break together. That's important because they can share what they're feeling and their emotions with other officers. That helps out a lot. Sergeant, as a lieutenant, and up the chain of command, you always have to be looking for that. And allow them to talk. Allow them to have that quote-unquote cop humor. To kind of get these emotions out, because the more that it's held in, the more damage it does. And so we've actually set up a peer support team in the Department of Public Safety that's totally, how do I say it? People don't know about it. You can call up any one of your peers at any time on this peer support team, and they talk to you. And it doesn't go up the chain of command. It stays right there, and they've got a direct line to our psychologist. So we're starting to set up those lanes so that officers can talk about it, so that they can be more open about it, so that we don't see the tragedies that happen in law enforcement, meaning substance abuse, suicide, high divorce rate, stuff like that.
When you think about the stresses that come with your job, I mean, the trauma that you see out on the road, the stress of dealing with shoot or no shoot situations, dealing with folks who might have mental illness, dealing with domestic tragedy and that kind of thing, it's almost an impossible job that we're asking you to do.
Well, I appreciate you realizing that, because it is. It's very tough. But as everybody knows, when something's really difficult, it's also really rewarding. We take a beating. Law enforcement does. And so the biggest thing that I tell people is give law enforcement a break. They're doing the best that they can do with what they've got. And it comes from all sides. So the vast majority of officers I know are cream of the crop people. They are just top of the line, and I respect them. And that's one reason I got into law enforcement. I'm second generation. My dad was a trooper.
No kidding.
So I'm second generation, and I saw the people that my dad worked with, the quality of people that my dad worked with, and I said, I want to be a part of that. It's the work, but more so it's the people that you work with, and the camaraderie there, and I dare to say it's second to none.
As a UHP trooper, you are not going to get rich on what they're paying you, and that has been the case for a long, long time. How much stress does that put on you before you even walk out the door with your uniform on?
It's a big one. You know, if we're worried about making the house payment or utility payment as you're going out to work. Now, when I first started out on the highway patrol, I made $8.05 an hour. Oh. Back in the mid '90s. Things have changed. Our legislature has been good to us. We've progressed into a workable wage, a living wage. But I can remember the days when it was extremely tough, and to go out and to work. My dad told me two things when I got into law enforcement. When I first started into law enforcement, he said, first, you'll never be rich. And he said, but if you budget your money, you'll always have enough. And secondly, he said, you'll enjoy what you do and the people you work with. And so I chose the second. If you look to go into law enforcement to be rich, you're not in the right profession.
Because of the fact that you're not going to become rich as a law enforcement officer, how does that affect the kind of people that are drawn to law enforcement?
That's an interesting question, and I pose it to this: it's like the military. You're never going to get rich in the military, but it's that innate desire to serve. It's like a good hunting dog. It's like you feel a duty to serve your community and to be a bigger part, or to be a part of something bigger than yourself. That's where the satisfaction in law enforcement comes. For somebody to come and serve and think, I'm going to be going into places that people are running from. The danger's there. I'm going to be putting myself in a situation that could harm me or take my life to protect other people. That's where the pay comes. That's where it's not monetary. It's satisfaction of a job well done. And I believe the vast majority of law enforcement out there, that's the reason they do that. They're fantastic people.
It's interesting, when we have had law enforcement funerals here in Utah, and we've had delegations come from all over the country from various agencies, I have heard stories of them being amazed at the kind of community support that law enforcement has here in Utah. How do you account for that?
Personal experience. Trooper Eric Ellsworth just passed away 2 years ago, and I was a part of that funeral, and I was a part of that, and there was a lot of tears shed. But that's where I think Utah is a little bit different than a lot of places in the nation. The citizens here in the state of Utah, for the most part, still respect law enforcement, still see it as a noble profession. And I think that's what you see. And I think that's why when people come from outside the state to an officer's funeral here in the state, I think that's what they see. They see a community that cares about they're law enforcement professionals. They see that genuine thankfulness for law enforcement. And as a law enforcement professional, I really appreciate that. That's part of why I do what I do.
We listen to the police scanners here in the Fox 13 newsroom all the time. They're going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The most dreaded 2 words on that police radio is officer down. When you hear those words, the agency boundaries drop and everybody comes running. And likewise, when there is an officer who loses their life in the line of duty, you see agencies represented from all over the country coming to honor them. Can you put into words the kind of brotherhood and sisterhood that exists in law enforcement that creates that kind of an atmosphere?
Oh, that's a. When you said officer down, the hair on my back of my neck stood up, and it's that reaction. And to see boundaries, I see it as like a brotherhood or a sisterhood. Do you fight with your brothers and sisters every once in a while? Yeah. But when it comes down to protecting each other and you see those drop, is when you see the best of humanity, in my opinion. You see, it doesn't matter the color of your shirt. It doesn't matter what it says on your badge. It doesn't matter, your gender or your race or whoever you are. It's pretty phenomenal. And to be on the inside and be a part and to be able to see that and to be able to be a part of that and see how the people react, it's phenomenal. It's just unbelievable.
When you have heard the words officer down on your radio, what goes through your heart and your mind? What happens inside you?
The first thing that comes to my mind is, for a split second, is that officer's family. It's the most important thing. Then what comes right after that is, how can I help this officer, or how can I help make a difference in this officer? You see a lot of times when you get an officer down call or an officer needs assistance call, and you see many different patrol cars show up on the scene. You see many different agencies, and a lot of what they're doing, if the incident is over, is they're standing there wishing that they could do something. And it gets a little bit frustrating at times, but that's the initial. When I hear officer down, I say a quick prayer. I think about the officer's family, whether it's parents or whether it's a wife or whether it's a husband, and just hope and pray that everything's going to be all right.
You troopers, most of you drive Dodge Chargers out there, your patrol cars. How much fun is it to light those things up on the highway?
It's fun. First of all, it's an adrenaline rush. We're all law enforcement are adrenaline junkies. That's part of the job. But what we've had to do, and my wife's told me, slow down, and I always hear that all of the time, slow down. The older you get, the slower you go. And I've had to remind my troopers that before when they're behind me and they're like, hey, we got to get going. And I said, the older you get, the slower you go. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to teach troopers a safe response. We don't want, especially young troopers, to just go wide open everywhere they go, because that's counterproductive. So we have them think, okay, do I need to get there in a hurry? Is somebody's life in danger? Then I probably need to get there in a hurry. If their life's not in danger, I can slow up. I can turn my lights and sirens off, and I can get there in almost the same amount of time. And we show them that. We say the difference is 10 seconds over, 30 miles of traveling. So it's better just to slow down, pay attention, exactly what we tell the general public.
When you are in your personal car, how fast do you go?
I personally, I'm a slow driver. And I'll tell you this is what I've seen. I've seen a lot of horrific crashes. I've seen a lot. And I tell people, what's in this brain, it probably needs to be taken out and scrubbed a little bit and put back in there. So I see the effects. I see the effects of high speeds. I see the effects of no seat belts. I see the effects of texting and driving. I haven't been stopped. Well, I should take that back. I've been stopped by 2 troopers, probably in the last 15 years. And one of them was for slightly over the speed limit, and the other one was for not having my lights on my car when it got dark. They probably thought I was impaired, but they weren't. And the one that pulled me over for not having lights on was the trooper that trained me.
No kidding.
So
did he cut your brake?
Oh yeah, for sure. But I haven't had a citation since I was 20.
Well, it's because you've been writing them. That's why.
I've written a lot. Yeah, that's for sure. But yeah, I haven't received a citation. I've been pulled over twice in probably the last 20 years.
Let's talk about the 80-mile-an-hour speed limit for just a second. It's been a couple of years since the legislature increased the speed limit on isolated parts of the interstates in Utah to 80 miles an hour. What has that done to the number of citations issued, to the number and severity of crashes that have occurred, and the number of fatalities that have been involved in those crashes?
So when we talk about speed, it's an interesting thing because we're talking about physics. The 80 mile per hour zone, UDOT's the ones that set the speed limits. They're the ones that do all the studies. We do the enforcement. Our troopers write a lot of tickets, and we do roughly 200,000 a year, traffic stops a year. I don't know how many of that's in the 80 mile per hour zone, but what I can tell you is the biggest difference is speed differential. When you've got a car on the interstate that's doing 50 or 55, and then you've got one that's coming up that's doing 80 or 85. That's what we try to look at and we try to mitigate. We are pretty strict on the speed enforcement, as a lot of the public know. If you're speeding and you get stopped by a trooper, generally you're going to get a ticket. So if it's 80 or if it's 70 or if it's 65 or if it's 55, we understand that that's the number one cause for fatal crashes. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to focus on that, and we're going to write a lot of tickets for that.
Can drivers get a ticket for driving too slowly?
They can, for impeding traffic, yes. And one of the pet peeves a lot of people see is the left-hand lane driver that's going below the speed limit or right at the speed limit. We write quite a few of those too for impeding traffic, and yeah, we do write those.
Yeah, important note, if you're out there, take note of what he just said. You left-hand drivers, loafers.
Left-hand loafers.
Two last questions, maybe combined in one. What is the most ridiculous excuse you have heard for exceeding the speed limit, and what is the excuse that works every time to get out of a ticket?
Oh, that's a great question. There's been a couple of times when I've actually pulled people over, and I knew I was going to give them a warning. So I've actually said, give me an excuse I haven't heard, and I'll give you a warning. And they'll think for a while, and they'll say something like, I'm late for this, or I'm late for church, or I'm late. I've heard it all. I've heard it all. Some of the best ones is after I've been pacing them and got them at a high rate of speed, and they've passed like 3 exits where there's a service station, and they give me the excuse that they have to use the restroom. And I explained to them, well, you passed 3 exits, and they just kind of get quiet a little bit.
Didn't have to go that bad.
The excuse that works every time, there isn't one. But what I appreciated, and what I always appreciate, is when people are honest with me. If I say, you know, I stopped you for doing 85 and a 70, and they say, yeah, I'm late for work. I normally don't speed. I look, I check. They normally don't speed. I appreciate that. I appreciate honesty, and I'll give you a huge break. If you give me some excuse about the car in front of you or the car behind you, or why aren't you getting everybody else, or why don't you go solve some real crimes, that doesn't do you any good.
Well, Lieutenant Todd Royce of the Utah Highway Patrol, Public Information Officer, thank you so much for your service, and thanks so much for being part of 3 Questions.
Thanks, Bob.